Hello everyone, I'm Kumkum Hirani. In today's presentation, my topic about the Sisyphus and the absurd hero, Camus' influence on Waiting for Godot. Academic information, table of content. My research question was, how does Albert Camus' concept of the absurd hero in the myth of Sisyphus influence Samuel Beckett's portrayal of existential struggle in Waiting for Godot? Hypothesis: Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot reflect the Albert Camus' philosophy of the absurd by the presenting Vladimir and Estragon as a modern Sisyphus, like a figure who persist in their meaningless existence. Their endless waiting mirror Sisyphus, eternal labor, embodying the absurd hero's acceptance of life's fluidity without seeking external meaning or resolution. Introduction. Albert Camus' philosophy of the absurd, particularly his concept of the absurd hero, profoundly influenced Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Camus, in The Myth of Sisyphus, which is published in 1942, argues that life is fundamentally meaningless and the human being must confront his absurdity. Sisyphus, condemned to endlessly push boundless up a hill only for it to roll back down, because as a symbol of a perversions in the face of fluidity. Similarly, Beckett's Waiting for Godot, which is published in a 1953, portrays Vladimir and Estragon in an endless cycle of waiting for the mysterious Godot who never arrives. Their perspective, actions, existential conversation, and uncertain hope mirror Camus' view of the absurd condition, where a human seek meaning in a meaningless world through the exploration of time, suffering, and the invisibility of repetition. Beckett's play embodies the essence of the absurd hero in the defined by Camus. So here the topic like Albert Camus and the absurdity. Albert Camus was developed a philosophy of absurd, which explored the conflict between human search for meaning and universal indifference. So here the Albert Camus was a French philosopher, and he introduced the absurdity in the and also. In the myth of Sisyphus, he discussed about the absurdity how, um, that how Sisyphus roll rock up to hills down, and Camus illustrated his struggle using the Greek myth of Sisyphus, condemned to roll the bounder uphill for eternity. Camus argued that rather than falling into despair, one must accept the absurdity of existence and continues living with a definition and personal freedom. His idea influenced absurdity literature, particularly Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Next topic was the myth of Sisyphus, the absurd hero. So we basically know about the story of Sisyphus. So Bhumi explained in her presentation. So I'm not tell the story. Albert Camus explored the idea of the absurd, the conflict between human desire for meaning and the different universe. Sisyphus, a figure from Greek mythology, is a condemned to the role bounder up a hill forever. Despite the fluidity of his task, Sisyphus does not seek escape but escapes his struggle. Camus called him an absurd hero because he embarrassed life despite its meaningless. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Accepting the absurd is a key to contentment. So, Sisyphus continuously doing same work without Samuel Beckett and the Theatre of Absurd. So Samuel Beckett is a key figure in the Theatre of Absurd, a movement analyzing life's lack of meaning. Eslin's definition, Martin Esslin continued to term in the Theatre of Absurd to describe play portraying existential uncertainty and illogicality. Absurdity and buckets were like a repetitive and meaningless action, breakdown and communication, lack of tradition, plot, and resolution. Also, we know that in a play, Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot, Vladimir and Estragon Gon's conversation are they talk about some kind of meaningless thing. So some example Waiting for Godot, two characters, Vladimir and Estragon, wait endlessly someone who never arrives, symbolizing the human struggle for meaning in a different world. Yeah. Camus' influence on Beckett, like Camus' absurd philosophy, Albert Camus' concept of the absurdity arises from the conflict between humans' desire for meaningless and the universal indifferences. In the myth of Sisyphus, Camus argues that recognizing the absurd should not lead the despair, but to define the personal meaning. Sisyphus versus Beckett's character, like Sisyphus throws the trap in a futile task, embarrassing his fate, embodying Camus' idea of the absurd hero. So, in the myth of Sisyphus, Sisyphus continuously do some work continuous. But we can also find that in Samuel Beckett's work, Waiting for God, Vladimir and Estragon not do any kind of work. They just still waiting for Godot. Also, they don't know about that who is Godot, when and where he comes. In Waiting for Godot, Vladimir Estragon mirrors Sisyphus' endless struggle, trapped in an unchanging cycle of waiting without a resolution. Camus versus Beckett's perspective of the absurd. Like Camus views absurdity as a challenge to be accepted with a personal rebellion. Beckett, in a contrast, presents characters who are stagnant, emphasizing the fluidity of a human action rather than a possibility of defiance. Camus, like Camus' influence on Martin Esli's interpretation of absurd hero. Esli described the absurd hero as someone who acknowledged the meaningless nature of existence. It continues to persist without illusion. In Waiting for Godot, reflect this philosophy through the character trapped is an endless cycle of waiting and repetitively actions. Vladimir Estragon is an absurd hero. In the conversation, forgetfulness and aimless movement highlights the absurd condition. They wait for Godot, who never arrives, mirroring Sisyphus pushing his rock endlessly. They contemplate escape, but never act, reflecting Camus' rejection of nihilism in the myth of Sisyphus. Ensure without meaning, like despite their suffering, Vladimir and Estragon persist in the waiting, accepting their fate without hope and resolution. Camus' idea that one must imagine Sisyphus happy applies finding meaning in the ensure rather than external validation. Here the conclusion, like a Camus' concept of the absurd is a scene in the myth of Sisyphus deeply influenced Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Camus argues that humans seek meaning in a meaningless universe. A true strength lies in accepting this absurdity and continue to struggle. Beckett reflects this idea through the Vladimir and Stragon, who, like a Sisyphus, engage in a repetitive purposeless action while waiting for Godot, who never arrives. As Estlin explained in the Theatre of the Absurd, Beckett's work highlights the existential uncertainty and the cycling nature of a human existence. Ultimately, both Camus and Beckett suggest that embarrassing the absurd without escape define the true absurd hero. Here are the references, and thank you. If you have any question, then ask freely.
Okay, so your questions, let me display on the screen. You can reply in the comment.